Daniel Mitchell froze in the middle of the crowded farmer's market, his heart stopping completely as his eyes locked onto a face. He had tried desperately to forget, for 8 long months, his ex-wife Grace. Standing near a flower stall, her hand resting gently on a belly that was unmistakably, beautifully pregnant, and in that single devastating moment, the world around him went completely silent as the realization crashed over him, like a tidal wave that threatened to pull him under. The strawberries he had been holding slipped from his fingers and scattered across the cobblestone ground, but he didn't notice, couldn't notice, because his entire existence had narrowed to the sight of the woman he had let go, carrying what could only be his child, a child she had never told him about, a secret she had kept hidden through all those months of silence. Daniel was 34 years old, the CEO of a successful architecture firm that his father had built from nothing, a man who had spent his entire adult life believing that success meant sacrificing everything else, that love was a luxury he could postpone until his career was secure, until the company was stable, until someday that never seemed to arrive. He remembered the night Grace had finally broken down, sitting at their kitchen table in the home he was rarely present in, tears streaming down her face as she told him she couldn't do it anymore, couldn't keep waiting for a husband who treated their marriage like an item on his to-do list that never quite made it to the top. "I need to know that I matter, Daniel," she had whispered, her voice cracking with years of accumulated loneliness. "I need to know that I'm not just an accessory to your ambition." But he had been too proud, too stubborn, too convinced that she would understand if she just gave him more time, that the sacrifices he was making were for their future, for the family they would someday have. He never told her about the secret he carried in his own heart, the fear that he would fail as a father the way his own father had failed him, the terror that he would become cold and distant like the man who had built an empire but lost his son in the process. So when Grace asked for the divorce, Daniel had signed the papers with a steady hand and an aching heart, telling himself it was better this way, that she deserved someone who could give her what she needed, someone who wasn't broken by childhood wounds he had never learned to heal. He threw himself into work with even more ferocity after she left, spending nights at the office, taking on project after project, trying to fill the gray-shaped void in his life with blueprints and business deals. His assistant Maria had watched him with worried eyes, leaving cups of coffee on his desk that grew cold, gently reminding him to eat, to sleep, to go home to an apartment that felt nothing like home. His mother Eleanor called every Sunday, her voice carrying the weight of concern. She tried to hide behind casual conversation, asking if he was taking care of himself, if he had heard from Grace, if he had finally realized what everyone else could see, that he had let the best thing in his life walk away. But Daniel had built walls around his heart so high that even the people who loved him couldn't reach him, and he convinced himself that the hollow feeling in his chest was simply the price of success, a temporary emptiness that would fade with time. Now, standing in the farmer's market on this ordinary Saturday morning in October, 8 months after signing the divorce papers that had felt like signing away his soul, Daniel watched Grace laugh at something the flower vendor said, her hand absently stroking her pregnant belly, and he felt every wall he had built come crashing down in an avalanche of regret and longing. He did the math in his head, frantically 8 months since the divorce was finalized, which meant she had to be. She must have been pregnant when she left, pregnant when she asked him to sign those papers. Pregnant and alone and scared, and she had never said a word. The crowd continued to move around him like water flowing past a stone, people chattering about fresh vegetables and artisanal bread, completely unaware that Daniel's entire understanding of the past 8 months was being rewritten in real time. He wanted to run to her, to demand answers, to ask why she had kept this from him, but his feet felt cemented to the ground, his voice trapped somewhere in his chest. Grace looked up then, as if sensing eyes upon her, and their gazes met across the crowded market with an intensity that seemed to stop time itself. He watched the color drain from her face, watched the way her hand pressed more firmly against her belly, as if protecting the child within from the shock of seeing him, watched the emotions flicker across her features: surprise, fear, grief, and something else he couldn't quite name. For a long moment, neither of them moved. And then Grace did something that shattered him completely. She turned and began walking away, disappearing into the crowd as quickly as her condition would allow. "Grace, wait." Daniel finally found his voice, his legs finally remembering how to move, and he pushed through the market after her, apologizing to the people he bumped into, desperate to reach her before she vanished from his life again. He caught up with her near a quiet bench at the edge of the market, where she had stopped, one hand braced against a lamppost, her breathing heavy from the exertion of trying to escape him. "Please," he said softly, keeping his distance because he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she was trembling. "Please, Grace, just talk to me. Why didn't you tell me?" She turned slowly to face him, and he could see that she had been crying, tears tracking silently down cheeks that were fuller now, glowing with the health of pregnancy, making her even more beautiful than he remembered. "What would you have said, Daniel?" she asked, her voice carrying 8 months of pain and resilience. "What would you have done if I had told you? Stayed out of obligation? Resented me for trapping you? Given up your precious company to be a father you never wanted to be?" The words hit him like physical blows, each one accurate, each one deserved, because he knew she was right. He had never given her any reason to believe he wanted children, had always changed the subject when she brought up starting a family, had let his fear masquerade as indifference. "I would have," he started, but she cut him off with a shake of her head. "You would have done exactly what you always did, Daniel. You would have made promises you couldn't keep, scheduled our baby in between board meetings, shown up late to first steps and first words and first everything." Grace's voice broke, but she continued, drawing strength from somewhere deep within herself. "I couldn't do that to my child. I couldn't let them grow up wondering why their father never had time for them, feeling like they were never enough to matter. So yes, I kept it from you. I filed those papers before I even knew for certain, and when the test came back positive 2 weeks later, I made a choice. I chose to give this baby a life full of love, even if it meant giving them a life without you." Daniel felt his legs give way, and he sank onto the bench, his head falling into his hands as the magnitude of what he had lost, what he had done, crashed over him. He thought about all the nights he had worked late while Grace ate dinner alone, all the weekends he had spent at the office while she decorated a home he rarely occupied, all the anniversaries and birthdays he had missed or forgotten or treated as afterthoughts. He thought about his own father, a man who had died alone in a mansion full of accolades and empty rooms, estranged from the son who had inherited his work ethic but not his capacity for connection. He thought about the cycle he had been so afraid of repeating that he had repeated it anyway, just in a different form. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words completely inadequate but absolutely sincere. "I'm so sorry, Grace. You're right. You're right about everything. I was so afraid of becoming my father that I became exactly like him. I put work before love, ambition before family, success before everything that actually mattered." He looked up at her with eyes that held 8 months of accumulated grief and longing. "But I'm different now. Or at least, I'm trying to be. After you left, He paused, struggling to find the words for the transformation that had been slowly occurring within him. "I realized that everything I was working for meant nothing without someone to share it with. I started therapy. I reached out to my mother, really talked to her for the first time in years. I've been trying to become the man I should have been, the man you deserved." Grace stood very still, her expression unreadable, and Daniel could see the battle playing out behind her eyes, the part of her that wanted to believe him fighting against the part that had been hurt too many times before. "I found out 3 weeks after you left," she finally said, her voice softer now, some of the defensive anger fading. "I was sick every morning, couldn't keep anything down, and I thought it was just the stress of the divorce, the grief of losing the life I had imagined. When the doctor told me I was pregnant, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot for 2 hours, crying. I didn't know what to do. I had just ended my marriage because my husband couldn't make room for me. How could I possibly believe he would make room for a baby? She moved slowly to sit beside him on the bench, leaving space between them but close enough that he could see the fine trembling of her hands, the way she was fighting to stay composed. "My sister Emma wanted me to tell you. She said you had a right to know, that the baby deserved to know their father. But I remembered all the times you changed the subject when I mentioned children. All the times you talked about how important it was to establish the company first, to achieve stability first. I was afraid you would see this baby as an obstacle, as something standing between you and your goals." Daniel listened with his whole heart, understanding for the first time the impossible position he had put her in, the weight of the decision she had been forced to make alone. "What I said about not wanting children," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "That was never about not wanting them. It was about being terrified of having them. My father was brilliant at building companies, but terrible at building relationships. He missed every important moment of my childhood, and when he was present, he was distant, critical, cold. I grew up believing I was unlovable because my own father couldn't seem to love me. I convinced myself that I would be the same way, that I would hurt my children the way he hurt me, that it was better to never have them at all." Grace's expression shifted from guarded to something softer, something that looked almost like compassion. "You never told me that," she said quietly. "In 8 years of marriage, you never told me about your father, about how much his distance hurt you." "I didn't know how," Daniel admitted. "I spent so long pretending it didn't affect me, proving that I was fine, that I could succeed without his approval or his presence. By the time I realized how much I was still carrying, how much it was affecting everything in my life, you were already gone." A long silence stretched between them, filled with the distant sounds of the market laughter and conversation and the ordinary joys of people who weren't sitting on the precipice of everything. Grace's hand moved unconsciously to her belly again, and Daniel watched the gesture with a yearning so intense it felt like hunger. "Can I?" he started, then stopped himself, not wanting to presume, not wanting to push. "Can you what?" she asked, her voice curious but cautious. "Can I feel the baby kick? My mother says they should be moving around pretty actively at this stage, only if you're comfortable. I completely understand if you're not." Grace studied his face for a long moment, seeming to search for something in his eyes. And whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she slowly reached out, took his hand, and placed it gently on the curve of her belly. For a few breathless seconds, nothing happened, and then a flutter. A tiny movement beneath his palm, a small foot or fist pushing against the wall of the world, as if to say hello. Daniel's breath caught in his throat, and tears he hadn't expected began streaming down his face. "That's our baby," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder and grief and hope, all tangled together. "That's our baby, and I almost missed this. I almost missed everything because I was too afraid to let myself want it." Grace was crying too now, watching him fall in love with their child through the simple contact of his hand on her belly, seeing something in his face she hadn't seen in years, vulnerability, presence. "I named them already," she said softly. I found out the gender at my last appointment, and I picked out a name. I hope you don't mind." "Tell me," Daniel said, not moving his hand, not wanting to break the connection for even a second. "It's a girl. I'm naming her Lily, after my grandmother, the one who raised me after my parents' accident. She's the one who taught me that love should never feel like waiting, that it should feel like home." Daniel smiled through his tears, remembering Grace's grandmother from the few times he had met her, before she passed, a tiny woman with silver hair and kind eyes, who had taken one look at him and told him he had the face of someone who was running from something. Lily, he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. Lily Mitchell. It's beautiful. I didn't say, Grace started, but Daniel quickly corrected himself. I'm sorry, Lily. Whatever last name you choose, I don't have any right to assume. They sat together in silence for a while. Daniel's hand still resting on her belly, feeling the occasional movement of the daughter he hadn't known existed until an hour ago. The sun moved higher in the sky. The market crowd thinned as vendors began packing up their unsold goods, and neither of them made any move to leave. What happens now? Grace finally asked, the question holding the weight of both their futures. I don't know, Daniel admitted honestly. I know I have no right to ask for anything. I know I hurt you in ways that apologies can't fix. But I want to be there for Lily, if you'll let me. Not as a part-time parent, not as a visitor who shows up when it's convenient, but really there, present, the father I should have promised to be from the beginning. Grace pulled his hand gently away from her belly and held it in both of hers, looking at him with an intensity that made him feel completely seen. I want to believe you, Daniel. I want to believe that the man sitting here with me is different from the man who signed our divorce papers without even trying to fight for us. But I need more than words. I need to see it. I need proof that this isn't just the shock of finding out about Lily, that this is real, lasting change. What can I do? He asked immediately. Tell me what I need to do, and I'll do it. Come to my next doctor's appointment. It's on Thursday at 2 o'clock. Show up on time, without your phone buzzing every 5 minutes, with work emergencies. Meet my sister and my friends, the people who have been taking care of me through this pregnancy. Let them see who you are now, and let them tell you about who I've become without you. And maybe, if everything goes well, we can start figuring out what it looks like to raise a child together, even if we're not together. It wasn't the reconciliation Daniel had secretly hoped for, but it was more than he deserved, and he knew it. Thursday at 2, he repeated. I'll be there. I'll be there if I have to cancel every meeting, fire every client, and shut down the entire company. Nothing is more important than this. Nothing is more important than her, than you. Grace smiled, and it was the first real smile she had given him since their encounter. Began small and tentative, but real. We'll see, she said, rising slowly from the bench. We'll see. The weeks that followed were the most challenging and transformative of Daniel's life. He showed up to the doctor's appointment, not just on time, but early, sitting in the waiting room with sweating palms and a heart that wouldn't stop racing. When the ultrasound technician spread the cold gel across Grace's belly and Lily's face appeared on the screen, Daniel cried against something he was doing more frequently now that he had given himself permission to feel. He met Grace's sister Emma, who looked at him with undisguised suspicion and told him flatly that if he hurt her sister again, she would make his life very uncomfortable. He met Grace's friends from the prenatal yoga class she had joined, women who had helped her through morning sickness and back pain and the emotional roller coaster of single pregnancy. Women who knew every failing of their marriage from Grace's perspective and didn't hesitate to share their opinions. He took it all without defense, without excuse, because he understood that earning trust meant accepting the consequences of having broken it. At work, he made changes that shocked everyone who knew him. He hired a co-CEO, a capable woman named Rebecca, who had been his vice president for years and deserved the opportunity. He delegated projects he would have once insisted on managing himself. He left the office at 5 o'clock, a concept so foreign that his employees initially thought he was ill. He continued therapy, digging deeper into the wounds his father had left, learning to separate his fear of failure from his capacity for love. His mother Eleanor cried when he told her about Lily, cried even harder when he told her about the work he was doing on himself, and said through her tears that she had prayed for this day for longer than he knew. As Grace's due date approached, Daniel found himself spending more and more time in her orbit, helping assemble the crib, painting the nursery a soft shade of lavender, going on late night ice cream runs, when cravings struck. They weren't back together, not in any official sense. But there was a tenderness developing between them, a foundation being rebuilt, one careful brick at a time. He learned things about her he had never known. Despite 8 years of marriage, that she talked to plants because she believed it helped them grow. That she had a secret collection of mystery novels she was slightly embarrassed about. That she wanted to go back to school for art therapy once Lily was old enough. She learned things about him too, that he had wanted to be an artist before his father pressured him into architecture, that he still sketched in secret, that he had kept every drawing she had ever given him, even after the divorce, because he couldn't bear to throw them away. On the night Grace's water broke, Daniel was the one she called. He drove her to the hospital with a calm he didn't feel, held her hand through 12 hours of labor, and when Lily Rose Mitchell finally came screaming into the world, he cut the umbilical cord with shaking hands and immediately declared her the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. She had Grace's eyes and his stubborn chin, tiny fingers that wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength, and a cry that sounded like the beginning of everything he had almost been too afraid to want. "I'm going to do better," he whispered to his daughter as he held her for the first time. Grace, watching them with exhausted, tearful eyes. "I'm going to be there for every moment, every milestone, every ordinary Tuesday. I'm going to learn from my father's mistakes instead of repeating them. I'm going to teach you that you are loved, that you are enough, that you are wanted. I promise you, Lily, I promise, with everything I am." Grace reached out and took his hand. The three of them connected in that hospital room like a constellation finally finding its pattern. "You already are," she said softly. "You already are better, Daniel. It took losing everything for you to find what mattered, but you found it. That's what counts." 6 months later, on a spring afternoon when the cherry blossoms were in full bloom, Daniel and Grace renewed their vows in a small ceremony in Grace's grandmother's garden, with Lily cooing contentedly in Emma's arms and Eleanor weeping happy tears in the front row. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. They still had work to do. Still had moments of doubt and frustration and fear, but it was real, and it was theirs. And it was built on a foundation of honesty and growth, rather than the assumptions and silences that had destroyed their first marriage. Daniel had learned that love wasn't something you could schedule for later. That family wasn't a goal to be achieved after success, but the very definition of success itself. He had learned that fear could be faced, that patterns could be broken, that it was never too late to become the person you wanted to be. And every night, as he rocked Lily to sleep in the lavender nursery, he thanked God for the farmer's market, for the coincidence or fate that had brought him face to face with everything he almost lost, for the second chance he knew he didn't deserve, but was determined to honor for the rest of his life. Because in the end, the greatest architecture he would ever design wasn't a building at all, it was a home, built of forgiveness and hope and the courage to change. A home where a little girl would grow up knowing without a doubt that she was loved, that she was wanted, that she was the reason her father finally stopped running and started living. Moral: it's never too late to become the person you should have been. But sometimes the greatest tragedy is waiting until you've almost lost everything to realize what truly matters.